Are you doing tempo runs wrong? Continuous tempo, cruise intervals, does it actually matter? Norwegian method, Daniels, zone model. There's so many different ways we can think about this. And I did a video explaining tempo. I did a video explaining some of the things that you're doing wrong with tempo. And in this one, I wanted to break down the difference between continuous tempo versus cruise intervals, what's better for building speed versus endurance, and why do some training plans use one more than the other without really explaining to you, the runner, the difference so you can be empowered. I'm going to try to break that down today in the differences once and for all, show you the physiological and the psychological differences between the approach, explain when is most beneficial to use them, which one, and give specific workouts that I use that will actually help you move the needle in your fitness rather than just do for completion's sake. I want to clear up the confusion, help you stop guessing, and make sure your tempo actually works for you, not against you. For those of you who haven't followed along yet, I'd love if you could subscribe to this channel. I'm Brant Stachel. I'm a former national team coach, a mental performance coach, and over the last 15 years, I've coached everyone from first-time marathoners to Olympic hopefuls, and I've tried to help athletes break through the physical and mental plateaus using evidence-based approaches. I've guided over 150 athletes at this point to Boston and coached over 24 Canadian national team members internationally and represented Canada 4 times as a coach. As I try to do in all my videos, let's get the language right first. So as I've done in the tempo pace video and the other videos in my training series, I want to break down the nomenclature because these terms are often used interchangeably when we're actually talking about different training structures. And fortunately, I'm trying to make sure everybody's on the same page so we can all talk the same language. Continuous tempo first. So if you're running tempo pace for one sustained effort, so that might be 20 minutes straight, 25 minutes straight, maybe even 30 minutes straight, whatever the workout calls for. So you get into tempo pace and you kind of stay there until the work is done. No breaks, no recoveries, just sustained effort at tempo. What cruise intervals are, this is Jack Daniels terminology, means you're breaking that tempo up into chunks with short recoveries. So instead of doing the 30 minutes straight, you might do 3 by 10 minutes on 2 minutes recovery, easy jog, or 6 by 5 minutes, or 2 by 15 minutes. And so the idea is that you're getting the same total times at tempo pace, but you're giving yourself brief recovery windows to stay controlled and sustainable. Where I see people get confused is both of these are tempo work, but both are targeting lactate threshold or LT2, but both are trying to push your threshold forward and improve ability to sustain faster paces. But the structure, continuous versus broken up, creates different training stresses and different psychological challenges. And that's what we're going to try and dig into. The other term you'll hear is broken tempo, which is basically the same as cruise intervals. Some coaches call it threshold repeats, tempo repeats. It's all the same concept. It's just breaking up the big chunk into shorter chunks with short recoveries. And so I want to be clear, with tempo, we're not talking about long recoveries. So if you're doing 3 by 10 minutes at tempo with 5-minute jog recoveries, it's probably not cruise intervals. It's more like a 10K or VO2 max session than an actual threshold session. And so cruise intervals use short recoveries, typically 1 to 2 minutes max, unless you're getting to about 15 or 20 minutes of tempo. So you don't fully recover between reps. So there's two main philosophies here, and you can see this in the Norwegian lactate informed system or the North American type Daniels type system where he uses both. The continuous tempo in philosophy 1 is king. This is a bit more of an old school approach. You see it coming from the marathon type thing where we do long continuous marathon pace. A lot of plans still use it, and I still use it in my plans, but if you're training for a faster race where you have to sustain effort for a long time, like a half marathon or marathon, you have to practice it. A continuous 30-minute tempo teaches you how to hold pace evenly, how to pace, how not to go out too fast, how to handle being tired, even when it's uncomfortable. So it builds that mental and physical durability. There's also an argument that continuous tempo more closely simulates race conditions. So in a race, you don't get to jog for a minute every 10 minutes. You have to hold the pace for the entire distance. So training should reflect that. From a physiological perspective, continuous tempo gets you right up to your lactate threshold and keeps you there for the entire duration. You're maximizing the time spent at that stimulus, which theoretically drives the biggest adaptation. The second philosophy is cruise intervals are superior. So we're seeing this very heavily influenced from the Norwegian lactate-informed model. This is also something that Jack Daniels uses quite a bit, and it's gained a lot of traction over the last couple decades. So the main focus of this philosophy is that cruise intervals allow you to accumulate more high-quality time at threshold without the muscular fatigue and the breakdown that comes from continuous tempo. So when you run a, let's say, 30-minute tempo, the first 10 minutes might be controlled and smooth, but by minute 25, you're suffering. Your form is falling apart, you're fighting to hold pace, and you might be pushing into VO2 max territory instead of staying in and around your threshold. With cruise intervals, let's go back to that 3 by 10 minute example, you can run each 10-minute rep controlled and smooth because you know there's a recovery coming. You stay right at threshold for each rep instead of drifting above it. The shorter recoveries don't allow you to fully recover, so you're still getting cumulative fatigue. Your lactate doesn't fully clear before reps, but you get just enough break to reset your form and your focus. So Daniels would argue that this allows you to accumulate more total time at true threshold pace compared to continuous tempo, where you might be spending half the time too hard and the other half hanging on for dear life. And so my take is both have their place. And I know this is like bad for social media because you're supposed to take a take and be only in this camp or only in that camp. But the truth is both methods work. And I think both are used appropriately to build fitness. So when I'm working with my athletes, a lot of the time I will operate on a 14-day cycle rather than a traditional 7-day cycle, where I will build them up with a continuous tempo and a broken tempo, and then a continuous tempo and a broken tempo. So each week we're alternating. I do this for a couple reasons. If we were just go 15 minutes, 20 minutes, 25 minutes, 30 minutes, chances are you're going to be competitive. You're going to be trying to run faster than last, whereas with the broken tempos, it breaks it up and gives you a little bit of time in between those two tempos. The other thing it does, it allows you to have weeks where you learn how to pace better. On the longer ones, if you're really slowing down to make sure you do it, but then on the broken tempos or the cruise intervals, you're way faster, that's telling me there's a mismatch and you don't really fully understand pacing. So it gives the coach a lot of information if we have both of them. I would like to note though that generally for newer athletes, I tend to go more the cruise interval perspective because they haven't developed pacing and it's a little bit easier on the body. So if they do mess it up or they're in that learning phase where they're trying to figure out how to properly run tempo, they're better able to actually do it. So let's break down the physiological differences. What's actually happening in your body with these two approaches? Because at the end of the day, the central question in training is the training we're doing getting us better for race day? So we're always trying to answer that question. First, let's go with continuous tempo, maximum time at threshold. So when you do continuous tempo, you're spending the entire duration, if paced appropriately, at or near your lactate threshold. So this creates a sustained metabolic stress where you're producing lactate, but ideally you're clearing it at the same rate. The problem becomes as you fatigue. That could be central or peripheral. And so the ability to clear lactate decreases. So even if you're running the same pace, your lactate levels start to creep up. And by the end of a 30-minute continuous tempo, you might be actually above your threshold and going into VO2 max territory. This isn't necessarily bad. It just means you're getting a different stimulus and probably not the one that you or your coach designed for that workout. Continuous tempo also creates more neuromuscular fatigue. You're asking your muscles to sustain a hard effort for a long time without a break. So if form starts to break down, you get less efficient. You're starting to work harder to maintain that same pace. And so from a glycogen perspective, continuous tempo is a little bit more depleting. You're burning through the glycogen stores without a break, which is why continuous tempos often feel hard in the last 10 minutes. Cruise intervals, you can think of a little bit more as controlled threshold accumulation. When you do cruise intervals, you're getting multiple exposures to threshold pace, but each one is shorter and more controlled. So let's say you do that 3 by 10 minute tempo workout that I've referenced with 2-minute jog recovery. During each 10-minute rep, you're at threshold. During the 1-minute jog, your lactate comes down a bit, but not back to baseline, but down from your peak. And so you start the next rep and you build back up to threshold, which creates a sawtooth pattern where you're spending most of your time near threshold without ever going far above it. So the advantage is that you can run each rep probably a bit closer to threshold because you're fresher at the start of each interval and you're not accumulating the same neuromuscular or peripheral fatigue as continuous tempo. You might be asking which one creates better adaptation. So the honest answer would be both create lactate threshold adaptations. Your body is going to improve the ability to clear lactate and sustain faster paces with either method. However, I would argue that for most people, cruise intervals probably give you more bang for your buck. Most athletes, because it allows you to accumulate more high quality time at true threshold pace without the form breakdown and mental fatigue of continuous tempo. And you'll see this in the originator of the Norwegian method, Maris Bakken, where he talked about that muscular suppleness. When you break it up, and this is what allowed him to do double threshold, if you notice in double threshold, there's very little use of longer bouts than about 6 to 8 minutes. It allows you to accumulate more of that tempo work. That said, as I mentioned earlier, continuous tempo has value too. It teaches you to push through discomfort, it builds mental toughness, and it more closely simulates race conditions where you have to sustain effort without breaks. When I'm coaching athletes for the half or the marathon in particular, I like to use a little bit longer blocks of continuous tempo to just train a little bit more holistically what the event's going to be like. The key, however, I think, and this is with every type of training, is knowing when to use it. So if you're interested in understanding when to use each method, that becomes a very practical question, which requires a lot of it depends, which is the worst statement in the world. I'm aware, but I'm going to try and break it down. And so here is my framework when assessing what type of workouts we should do. You should use continuous tempo when you're training for races that are 10K and longer, where that sustained effort matters. If you're training for a half marathon or marathon, you need to practice holding pace for an extended period of time. Continuous tempo gives you a little bit more like that, like your long marathon pace runs do. You should also use it if you're experienced and comfortable with tempo work. This is why I said I don't like using it for beginners. If you've been running for years, you know how to pace yourself, continuous tempo is a great challenge that drives more adaptation for you. If you're in the late stages of a training cycle and you want some more race-specific prep, so maybe 3 to 4 weeks out from a goal race, I like throwing in a continuous tempo to simulate race effort and build confidence. The last reason why I would potentially use continuous tempo is you've been doing shorter tempo efforts, say 15 to 20 minutes of total duration, and it feels relatively short, but everything seems manageable and you don't feel like you're driving adaptation forward. So then you can go and change a little bit from what you've done and move forward. Whereas with cruise intervals, I would use those if you're new to tempo work, as I've mentioned already, or building back from injury is really great pace. It gives you a safer, more controlled way to introduce threshold training. You can ease in without overwhelming yourself. I would also use it if you're doing longer total volumes of tempo work. So generally 35 minutes plus. And so if you want to accumulate a lot of time at threshold, 40, 50 minutes, cruise intervals let you do that without form breakdown. I'd also use cruise intervals when you're early in a training cycle and building your threshold. If you haven't done a lot of threshold work, or if you're coming off of a shorter block of mile 5K stuff. If you're running in tough conditions, let's say heat, hills, wind, altitude, cruise intervals give you a mental and physical break to manage the difficult conditions so you can reset and refocus between reps. This tends to be the system I use. I'll start with cruise intervals and then I'll alternate weekly. So I want to build their threshold to safely and accumulate that volume. As they get more fit or they move into a marathon build, we'll tend to have a little bit more longer intervals. And so this gives them the benefits of both methods, the volume and control of cruise intervals, plus the mental and physical toughness of continuous tempo. If you look at how you put it into a week for marathoners or like even half marathoners, sometimes you might be coming off a long run with pace work. So on the Tuesday afterwards, you might not want a continuous tempo because you know their legs are a little bit fried. So in that case, I would then go with a broken or cruise tempo interval. So here are some of the biggest mistakes that I see with both continuous tempo and cruise intervals, because there's plenty of them, trust me. First one would be running continuous tempo too hard. I alluded to this one a little bit earlier. If you don't know how to pace properly with tempo, it's going to be really hard to nail a tempo session. If you set out to run, let's say 30 minutes, and you go out at the pace you think you should be running, but the pace is actually closer to usually 10K for most people, you're going to be dying at 15 minutes. You're slowing down, your form is falling apart, and you're not getting the threshold adaptation that you truly wanted. You've turned it into a completely different workout. It's more or less a race. And so if you can't hold that pace, and remember the question that I always give athletes is, could I do this pace or effort for 45 to 60 minutes? If the answer to that is no, you're going too hard. Period, full stop, slow down. It's better to run the 30 minutes as a sustainable threshold pace than to run 20 minutes too hard and blow up. I talked about this in the tempo series, but when we're running tempo, what we want to do is, if this is our lactate threshold, we want to be underneath it. Going above it doesn't actually give us much more benefit. In fact, I would argue it hurts you and it changes it to a VO2 max session. So then when you do a VO2 max session later in the week, you've already got that stimulus. In tempo running, it's actually better to be slower and underneath than it is faster and over top of your lactate threshold. The second biggest mistake I see is taking too long of recoveries on your cruise intervals. I see this all the time. Athletes will do, let's say, they'll go back to that 3x10 minutes at tempo, but they take 3 or 4 or 5 minutes between recovery. That's not cruise intervals anymore. That's just repeats with full recovery. You're not getting any cumulative fatigue. You're not teaching your body to process lactate efficiently. You're not actually doing the point of tempo. You're not building that resilience. I would argue it also helps you learn to not pace, because if you're fresh, you can crank anything for 10 minutes and you're probably running closer to 10K pace, going over your lactate threshold every rep. The whole point of cruise intervals is rather short recoveries. As a general rule, I would go anything 5 minutes or less, 1 minute, 8 minutes, 75 to 90 seconds, 10 minutes, 2 minutes, 15 minutes, 3 minutes, 20 minutes, 4 minutes. See how that's not a lot of recovery? It's just enough to reset but not recover fully if you've paced it correctly. The third mistake that I often see is confusing cruise intervals with VO2 max intervals. This one's subtle, but if you're doing 5 by 5 minutes at tempo on a minute recovery, that's a cruise interval. But if you're doing 5 by 5 minutes at 5K pace or faster, that's not tempo, that's VO2 max work. And that requires a whole different recovery structure. So the pace and the effort matter. Cruise intervals should be at tempo pace, the pace you could hold for about an hour. If you're running them faster than that, you're doing a completely different workout and a disservice to your training. The final mistake that I see all the time is not adjusting for fatigue or conditions. So if you're supposed to do a 30-minute continuous tempo, but you're coming off a hard week, maybe a hard long run, and you're tired, maybe that's not the day for continuous tempo. Maybe you should switch to cruise intervals. So you'll still get the work in without destroying yourself. Or if it's hot, windy, altitude, hilly, right? Maybe you adjust the structure. Don't just blindly follow the plan, use your brain. It's situation contextual to everything it is that we're trying to do and how it fits into, remember that central question of, is our training serving us to get better on race day? So as always, I try to get practical in these videos and give you a little bit of what I do. So here are some specific workouts that I'll do on that 14-day structure that I put forward if we were building somebody back up who's new to tempo or coming back from injury. So the first workout that I would give in week 1 might be 4 by 4 minutes at tempo on 1 minute recovery. Let's say you do a 15-minute warm-up, 15-minute cool down. In week 2, I might give them a little bit of a range on a straight tempo of 12.5 minutes at tempo to 15 minutes tempo. This gives a little out should you not be feeling good, if you haven't paced it well, because remember, we're learning and we're coming back and fitness is moving. So that would be week 2. Week 3, I might do something like 2 by 8 minutes at tempo on 75 seconds recovery. Elongating out that cruise interval a little bit, teaching them still how to pace. That would be also, again, 15-20 minutes warm up. We can assume that for all of them, and cool down. And then the next week, I might do 15 to 17.5 minutes at tempo, where they're forcing it to go a little bit longer. And then coming after that week, I might do 2 by 10 minutes at tempo. And so I try to build it that way, where the cruise interval week is 2.5 to 5 minutes longer than the continuous tempo the week before. So that way, the following week, you can up that intensity a little bit because the athlete already knows, okay, I did 20 minutes last week. I might be able to do 17.5 this week straight. And so when they get into that cycle, you get a little bit of a belief effect. It teaches pacing. Psychologically, they understand that they're getting better every week. And so this starts to become the bread and butter of what most athletes do to build themselves up. If they're a new runner, return from injury, or if they're moving up in distance, if their volume's gone up and there's high fatigue and we're trying to build tempos into, say, a marathon build, we'll go back and forth like this. It allows a lot more leeway and it gives the athlete multiple weeks to build up to longer continuous tempos where they not only have the confidence but the durability and the understanding of how to pace so they can really crush a long continuous tempo. So if you want some key takeaways, I'll wrap it up with this. Both continuous tempo and cruise intervals are effective ways to train your lactate threshold. They both work. Don't overthink which one's better. Use the runs that are best for your situation. Cruise intervals allow you to accumulate more time at threshold, at true threshold rather, because you stay controlled on each rep. Continuous tempos can build that mental toughness and simulates longer race conditions when you have to sustain effort without breaks. I like to use cruise intervals early in a training cycle to build your threshold safety. Short recoveries are key for cruise intervals, 1-2 minutes max. If you're making them longer, you're not doing the same workout. Don't run continuous tempos too hard. That turns into a completely different workout and defeats the purpose. That's ego pacing. We want actual pacing. Finally, both methods require proper pacing and execution. You can't just go out and hope for the best. Focus on running at true tempo pace. Not too hard, not too easy. I know it sounds like Goldilocks, but remember that central question. Could I do this for 45 to 60 minutes straight up? Use your effort, use your breathing, use your heart rate to guide you, not just the pace. Remember, I talk about this all the time. Triangulate across multiple domains to make sure you're doing the right purpose for each workout. Hopefully this clears up continuous tempo versus cruise interval tempo debate a bit for you. I'm not going to take one camp or the other. I hate when people do that. It's not a this or that. Oftentimes it's contextual and it depends on what you're trying to achieve. You should know that both are valuable tools. Use them strategically and you'll see your threshold improve. If you've liked this, this is part of my ongoing series on training structure and pacing. If you haven't watched the easy pace, tempo pace, marathon pace, and interval pace video, I've tried to do them all, which we'll link in the show note. Go and check those out. Next up, I'm going to try and cover a few more debates between some of the ideologies we have. So look for those. I hope that you find this channel helpful. So I appreciate you listening. Thanks a lot. Please subscribe, follow along, share what you're training for. I love to read the comments and engage with all of you, and can't wait to see what it is you have planned and continue on your training journey.